It's been said if you practice mindfulness, you will experience two qualities will become more pronounced in your experience. One is the rising of wisdom, the capacity to shift from your story or your preferences to what's actually here, to actually name what is true, to see what is true through all the different modifications of the mind. The other quality that arises is compassion. As you sense the inherent qualities of impermanence, the futility of grasping, there's also a heightened sense of the heart, of the pain in holding on, the joy that comes in letting go, and the compassion that you begin to feel for yourself as well as for others. And I wanted to share a little bit about the compassion aspect of practice. And there's a story you may have heard, but it kind of goes right to the essence of it. Many years ago, when I worked as a volunteer in a hospital, I got to know a lovely little girl named Liz, who was suffering from a rare, life-threatening disease. Her only chance of recovery appeared to be a blood transfusion from her 5-year-old brother, who had somehow survived the same disease and had developed the antibodies needed to combat the illness. The doctor explained the situation to her little brother and asked the little boy if he'd be willing to give his blood to his sister. I saw him hesitate for only a moment before taking a deep breath and saying, "Yes, I will do it if it'll save her life." As the transfusion progressed, he lay in bed next to his sister and smiled, as we all did, seeing the color returning to her cheeks. Then his face grew pale and his smile faded. He looked up at the doctor and asked with a trembling voice, "Will I start to die right away?" Being young, the little boy had misunderstood the doctor. He thought he was going to have to give his sister all of his blood in order to save her life. Compassion is our capacity to feel and empathize what another is experiencing. But even before that, the capacity to recognize what you're feeling. The good news in meditation is you become more sensitive, and the bad news is you become more sensitive. I think the philosophers of William and Theodore said it best, otherwise known as Bill and Ted. Party on and be excellent to each other. And it's in the being excellent to each other that there's some real transformation. So I'd like to talk about 4 things. I'd like to talk about what's called karuna, or compassion, and the balance of compassion and wisdom. Because if they're out of balance, things get weird or hard. Some thoughts on how you can incline your mind toward more compassion in your life. And a little bit about compassion as a path of awakening. So in Aldous Huxley's book, The Island, there were the birds that were constantly calling. He said it sounded like awake. One bird would count awake. The other bird species would be calling karuna, karuna. So be awake in compassion. The constant reminders that we have in the background. The classic example, which I shared just recently, is if you imagine you're walking in the woods and you see a cute little puppy. And you go up to that puppy and suddenly it lunges at you. And you jump back and your relationship to the puppy is suddenly changed. And then you see that the puppy's leg is caught in a trap. And then your relationship changes again. And that, in essence, becomes the practice of compassion, is seeing where our leg is caught and how we're acting out of fear or out of self-preservation, and seeing how others act as their leg is caught, and understanding deeply from their experience what it's like for them. I had mentioned earlier I was doing this TV pilot, and it was in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is not the safest city in the planet. They've done a huge amount of urban development. But when I went up, the hotel was only a couple blocks away from the theater. And at the end I said, well, I'm just going to head back to the hotel. And they said, are you sure you don't want us to drive you? And I said, it's 0.2 of a mile on my iPhone. They said, let's get you a driver. And that put some fear in me. And the next morning, I had to walk to the train station, which was another 3 blocks. But I saw how tight I was, and how when I would see someone coming at me, I would try to figure out, should I make eye contact? Should I not make eye contact? Should I cut to the other side of the street? And what I found was, as I was walking down the street and sort of other people came my way, I saw how harmless they were. But the fear that I was holding, and I really saw that my leg was caught in a trap of sort of prejudice and self-protection. And just seeing that helped me to relax quite a bit, to sort of come back to myself. So it's an interesting thing to reflect on anywhere in your life where you feel caught. Can you sense how your leg is caught in a trap somehow? Either through grasping or through some form of avoiding or pushing away. And the same when you can role reverse with another, it can be quite an enlightening practice. Here's what the Buddha said about compassion. He said, compassion is that which makes the heart of the good move at the pain of others. So it's the movement of the heart in relationship to the pain of others. It is called compassion because it shelters and embraces the distressed. This is not just about altruism. This is also about self-healing and about awakening. It's about recognizing the pain that arises for you in your life and sensing if you can meet that with a quality of compassion. There's the story of a doctor who took over a psych ward in Hawaii. You may have heard this story, and it was renowned for burning people out and having violent outbreaks. And he agreed he would take this job only on his own conditions. And so, as the story goes, for the first few weeks, no one saw him. But he had this practice of he would go through everyone's chart and read their chart carefully, and would say internally, "I'm sorry, I love you." And with everyone on staff, he did that same practice. And as the story goes, the place transformed through that intention of compassion and healing. It's interesting how our hearts can be touched, sparked by the act of kindness. A couple days ago, I was at the Safeway in Great Falls, and as I was rushing in to grab a few things before heading home, there were a bunch of young teenage boys, I think maybe 13, right around that age, and sort of a gang of them, And they were approaching me, and I was kind of curious, and they had some paper in their hand, and they were raising money for a battered women's shelter, and for women unwed mothers who needed help. I don't know if it was a Boy Scout project or what it was, but they had a list of items that they wanted, that they needed and that were requested. And so I took my sheet of paper and I found myself as I was going through the store, reading what was there and getting more excited about finding some things that I thought would be helpful. And I came out and I handed over my goods to these guys, and I was just so touched. I shook their hands and I thanked them for their time, because it really did affect me in such a powerful way. We recognize that, we see the heart's response to suffering. The thing about compassion is if it's not balanced with wisdom, then we run into a number of problems. First of all, we sort of run into kind of caretaker consciousness, where we're always caring for others, where we're burning ourselves out, or we become oversensitized to all the pain in the world. We hit our empathy threshold, where we just can't take it in anymore. It's when it's balanced with wisdom that you can find that sweet spot, that middle way. Here's a story that I think illustrates this nicely. A man spent hours watching a butterfly struggling to emerge from its cocoon. It managed to make a small hole, but its body was too large to get through it. After a long struggle, it appeared to be exhausted and remained absolutely still. The man decided to help the butterfly, and with a pair of scissors, he cut open the cocoon, and thus releasing the butterfly. However, the butterfly's body was very small and wrinkled, and its wings were all crumpled. The man continued to watch, hoping that in any moment the butterfly would open its wings and fly away, but nothing happened. In fact, the butterfly spent the rest of its brief life dragging around its shrunken body and shriveled wings, incapable to fly. What the man, out of kindness and in his eagerness to help, had failed to understand was that the tight cocoon and the efforts that the butterfly had to make in order to squeeze out of that tiny hole were nature's way of training the butterfly and of strengthening its wings. Sometimes a little extra effort is precisely what prepares us for the next obstacle to be faced. And anyone who refuses to make that effort or gets the wrong sort of help is left unprepared to fight the next battle and never manage to fly off. So when you think about something you're struggling with right now, what skills are you building? When we look at the hero's journey through life, the insight and the breakthrough is oftentimes preceded by struggle. You may be familiar with the work referred to as anti-fragile, which is this whole study of how you need challenges in order to grow. You need challenges to stimulate your whole system to not only survive, but to thrive. A doctor and a neuroimmunologist I got to hang out with told me how in his study of the brain, if you are not exercising, your body assumes it's dying. When you're exercising, there are certain there are enzymes, neuropeptides that are released that are giving your entire body the signal that you need to stay strong and you need to stay sharp. When you're not doing that and your brain isn't having that experience, it automatically begins to shut down. So whenever we're presented with a challenge, we can ask ourselves, what's good about this? What am I going to learn here? What am I going to master? If you feel stressed out about time in your life, you're going to learn how to prioritize really well. If you're being intimidated by someone at work, you're going to learn how not to give your power away. And if you're unable to speak up in a conflict, you're going to learn how to tell the truth and be kind. You'll develop that skill and that mastery. So wisdom is the recognition of karma. And in relationship to those around us who are suffering, it's that exquisite balance of keeping our hearts open and really getting that we're all here to learn life's lessons. Of course, that doesn't mean that we don't offer support. But when we overdo the compassion without recognizing the wisdom, then real growth doesn't happen. So the awakening of what's called bodhicitta in Buddhist psychology, the awakened mind and the awakened heart, sees the inherent truth of reality, that everything is changing. Everything born out of causes and conditions is subject to change. It recognizes that anything to which you attach will result in dissatisfaction or suffering. And it sees that who you think you are is also subject to change. And who you are becomes a very, very powerful question into that realization. Compassion is seeing the interconnectedness of everything. Compassion is not turning away from that which precedes the insights, which is oftentimes, great struggle. Seeing deeply into your yearning, your clinging, your wanting, and letting go. Seeing into your aversion and letting go. So the question becomes, how can, in the midst of our busy, crazy lives and this amazing time on the planet, how can you incline your mind toward more compassion? I have a friend who I lived with in the ashram for a number of years. He's been an amazing world adventurer. He's had more life experience on the road in every place on the planet you can imagine. His most recent incarnation is being married with a child and a baby on the way and teaching middle school science in the mountains of North Carolina. And it's fascinating to read his stories as he kind of sends updates out. This kind of free-spirited fellow is now living on peanuts as a public high school, middle school science teacher. And he is an absolute revolutionary. So he was writing recently about his Thanksgiving, and he talked about having to go in and work. This is what he said. I had to work. I spent 8 hours grading tests in my classroom. I graded over 500 papers in that time. And when I walked out the door at 4 p.m., I didn't have a single paper left in my inbox. I don't have to go back till Sunday to plan for my next unit and write more tests. I did one more thing yesterday. I called parents. I called parents of 7 of my quote-unquote bad students and 1 of my quote-unquote best students. When I got through to each parent and identified myself, immediately I could feel the hackles raise on the other end of the line. What do you want? I'm so tired of you people calling to give me more bad news about my son. But I stayed level. Do you have a brief moment to talk about Casey or Gage or Nathan? And what I told each of those parents was the same. I am so proud of your son. He is working so hard in my class. He is engaged. He is on task. He is a model for other students. He is a mentor for others. He is doing his work. He is excited to know the answer to questions in class. It was the same theme with variations for each student. And each parent reacted with their variation of shock. One mother cried. She said, "No one has ever called me to tell me anything good about my son. God bless you." Each parent was so joyful that I'd actually called to praise their child. I called because I was so proud of their children. They'd shown so much growth in my classes, and how I know how much they had to overcome to get to where they are. I called the parent of the smart girl, one of my privileged students, for a different reason. Her mother was a little confused. I know she has trouble talking in class. Oh no, she's great in my class. I'm calling because of her character. Her character? And I explained that on the day that my students had gone wild and out of control, and I'd given the entire class a silent lunch to reflect on their behavior and fill out a better choice form, the behavior I exhibited, how it was disruptive, what could be a better choice in the future. Each student had to sign it and have it signed by their parents. Each one of those privileged kids wrote that they did nothing wrong, that I was picking on them, that maybe someone else had been doing something, but not them, except Annie. She wrote exactly what she did, she took responsibility, and she owned her behavior. I called to tell her mother how much I respected her daughter for her honesty, and how that was far more important than getting good grades. Her daughter was a successful human being because she was honest and had integrity. And that was my day. And I should say that his bad students were actually turning around in a big way. But imagine the ripples of those actions, of those calls. If you can just imagine the effect in the household from someone taking time to be kind. So it might be nice just to take a moment for a short reflection. You might feel the breath as a way to draw your attention back inside. And you might take a moment to reflect on the experience of someone being kind to you. It might be a recent memory, maybe a far back memory, and if you don't have one, maybe you can make one up. As you reflect on that memory, just take a few moments to slow down, to pause, and to sense what that feels like inside. You might bring into mind someone in your life who is struggling right now, who is having a hard time. And you might sense what it would feel like if you were to hold them in some quality of kindness, to imagine what they're feeling, and to wish them well. And at the same time, to reflect on the wisdom faculty, the quality of karma, of what they're learning in their life right now. Is there a sense of what they need, what they might need from you? And if they were to receive that, what do you imagine that would feel like for them? And as you're ready, you can gently deepen your breath. There's a classic story of a Native American grandfather who's with his grandson, and he says to his grandson, there are two wolves inside me. One is angry, and one is vicious and mean, and the other one is kind. The other one is compassionate and loving. And they're fighting all the time. And his grandson says, well, which one wins? And he said, the one that I feed. We can incline the mind toward compassion just with awareness, as a remembering of intent. When you have simply an open heart, it's like with no wisdom, it's like a sailboat without a rudder. It just goes where the wind flows. But wisdom with no heart is cruel. When you can see another's suffering and to see the lessons that they're learning, then you can absolutely be there to offer empathy and deep support. So I try to remember to do that. And one of the most challenging times for me to practice that is when I get behind the wheel of a car, especially around here, because it's so much of the unreal other. But I thought, because the weather was so lousy and the traffic is just unbelievable tonight, really, really awful, I thought I would take on compassionate driving practice on my way down here. So when someone was nosing their way into my lane, I would normally want to punish them for doing that. I just gave them lots of space. I found myself with people sort of pulling on the right, sort of anticipating that they might need to pull out. And it was so interesting because some people waved, and it was like a wave of relief, like, oh, thank you. It was really kind of fun. The other thing I like to do, I mentioned before, I bought my mother-in-law's 18-year-old Volkswagen Cabrio convertible. So it's 18 years old, but it's a great little car. But I have a policy, and that is whenever I have the top down and there's another convertible with the top down, and we're at a stoplight at the same time, my policy is I always ask the other person if they want to trade. It's just a really fun thing to do. Some people are incredulous, but there was someone in a brand new Mercedes, and we were like sort of doing back and forth. Our tops were down, and then I pulled up next to him, and so I just called out. I said, would you like to trade? And he turned the music down. I said, I'm sorry. I said, would you like to trade? And he looked at my car. He said, that is a great car. And he said, you know the difference between your car and my car? And I said, what? He said, $1,200 a month. And I said, I only paid $400 for the whole car. And he drove off. And I kind of like doing that because it's just a fun thing to do, particularly in an area where we tend to be so frozen, particularly when we're on the road. And yet, even though that's sort of a risky thing for me as an introvert to do, it's always fun to see how people respond, because it's usually with laughter or some kind of playfulness. So I wanted to share a little bit before we close about how the mind can shift from other to seeing the humanity in others, and a particular practice that can be very powerful for that. So this is a story you may have heard from December of 1943. A German ace pilot, Hans Stigler, had every reason to shoot down the American B-17 bomber in front of him. Enemy forces had already killed his brother early in the war and were now bombing German cities. Not only that, if Stigler took down this particular bomber, he would round out his kill score and secure the German equivalent of the Medal of Honor. As Stigler prepared to squeeze the trigger, he thought that it was strange that the bomber wasn't firing back at him. Going in for a closer look, he saw the gunner dead and most of the crew wounded. The plane itself was riddled with bullets and struggling to stay aloft. In his heart, Stigler knew he'd be killing men in cold blood. Instead, he opted to do the honorable thing. He signaled to the shocked American pilot and flew with the bomber to prevent it being targeted by anti-aircraft fire. Stigler escorted the plane until they reached the North Sea, where he broke off and saluted his adversaries one last time. It was not until 5 decades later that the American pilot, Charles Brown, successfully tracked down the man who saved him. The two men became the best of friends, and as a show of thanks, Brown made Stigler the guest of honor at a reunion he had planned with his crewmen. They showed Stigler a video of their children and grandchildren, people who would not have lived if it was not for his act of compassion. The awakening of bodhicitta can be described as seeing the self in other and other in self. Here's a little bit of what is offered on this teaching. And if you like, you can close your eyes, and I'll just offer this reading, and we'll have a little bit of practice together before we end. So you might hear these words as meditation instructions, and we'll explore a little bit of the Tonglen practice. Strive to meditate upon the sameness of yourself and others. In joy and sorrow, all are equal. All beings in their joys and sorrows are like you, all in wanting happiness. Your pain does not afflict or cause discomfort to another's body, yet your pain is hard for you to bear because you cling and you take it as your own. Other beings' pain you do not feel, and yet because you take them for yourself, their suffering is yours and therefore hard to bear. Therefore, dispel the pain of others, for it is simply pain, just like your own. Others you can aid and benefit, for they are living beings, like your body. As you feel the breath, feel the distinction between the inhalation and the exhalation. And feel this quality of wisdom, this recognition of the 3 characteristics of reality, of impermanence, of the suffering that arises from clinging, and seeing that all that is changing is not you. And sense in your own way this quality of compassion, qualities of kindness, and as you breathe in, just feel that within you that is between you and feeling free. And as you exhale, simply relax. As you breathe in, just sensing the stress, the suffering of your life. And as you exhale, relax. You might reflect on these following words. Whatever pain you feel in your life, other people feel this too. Whatever stress, whatever suffering you experience in your life, other people experience too. Whatever joy you feel in this life, other people feel too. Wherever gratitude you feel, other people feel too. In these remaining minutes, reflecting on this quality of wisdom, this quality of compassion, reflecting on these following words from Sri Nisargadatta. Wisdom tells me I am nothing. Compassion tells me I am everything. Between those two, my life flows. You might bring into mind those with whom you may have spent this week, this holiday, and in your own way, wish them well. Offer your compassionate intention for their well-being. And as you're ready, you can gently deepen the breath. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes open. So thank you for coming out tonight. And thanks for coming out into the cold. I hope you had a good Thanksgiving. And whatever compassion you generated healed over anything that may have happened this last week. There's nothing quite like going home for the holidays.